do Broncos-Bills. You lead us, Pete.
All right, Josh Allen. Is there anybody better, and is there anybody probably even to some extent, John, maybe as deserving because of what he's been able to accomplish as a player? But there's always been one hitch, to why they're not in the Super Bowl. The Kansas City Chiefs comes to mind. And are they going to be able to get? By the way, Kansas City is a team that's got the bye week this week, and deservedly so. They just had the one loss, but the Bills, John, they're pretty special. I think Josh Allen this year might have had his best year I've seen. And by the way, only 14 sacks this year. The guy has 28 touchdowns and 6 interceptions. He had a remarkable year and running the football, because the people who don't really realize it, because they look at quarterbacks, they don't really see how big they are unless they're standing next to them. Let me tell you something. Josh Allen looks like a tight end when you stand next to him. I mean, here's a guy who's 6'5", maybe even a little bit more, about 245 pounds, maybe a little bit more. I mean, he's a big human being, John. He's a heck of a football player. It's very deserving. But Bo Nix and those guys are coming to town, the Broncos. I don't know how many people had that sitting there, back in August, that the Broncos would be in the playoffs, but they are. Bo Nix is one of the best of the drafted quarterbacks this year. And I think it's going to be an interesting game, but I think Buffalo is going to take it. What about you?
Well, first of all, it's one of the few times I ever get to correct Pete on sports, because the Kansas City Chiefs, you're right, 15-1, Pete, until they played the Broncos the last game and sat 16 players.
Well, yeah.
The NFL version of load management. And back in the old days, Pete, they would have fined them for that.
Yeah.
And maybe they will or did, but those fans in Denver, yeah, they got to see their team beat them, steamroll them 38-0. But come on, that was not a pro football team on the field hardly against the Broncos. But to your point, Pete, the Broncos, really good sackers. I mean, they have a sack attack that is going to keep Josh Allen in the pocket. Now, if he breaks out of that pocket, that's when he is even more dangerous, because, like you said, size and speed. But I'm going to say Josh Allen and the Bills win, but I don't think they win going away, Pete, like some people think. I think it's going to be a relatively tight game.
Yep, good football team. They are a well-coached football team. Even if I'm not a huge fan of the coach, he's done a great job, so you got to give him his kudos. I mean, sometimes you got to take your opinions and shove them off to the side, and just the reality of what they've done this year. I don't know how many people had them even getting into the playoffs, but I wouldn't say it was a high number. All right, next up, we've got the Packers going out east, John. They're going to Philly against the Eagles. I think it's going to be a really interesting game, but the Eagles, in my opinion, are the far better football team. And I say that because of the fact that Saquon Barkley had a year that was absolutely incredible, right? I mean, the guy rushed for 2,000 yards. He was an absolutely amazing player all year long for them. They've got a great offensive line. If there's any issue at all, it might be just Jalen Hurts. Is he healthy? And they've got some decent backup quarterbacks, but you don't really want to have to count on your backup quarterbacks. I think Jalen Hurts, if he's healthy enough, and I think that he probably will be, he's going to be out on the field, and that's going to make things very, very interesting for sure. And I think that with him, with what they've got on the offensive line, if they can get that running game going against the Packers, I think that they're going to have this one going away. As a matter of fact, when I was on that Fox 9 show, they asked me, they said, what are the odds? What do you think? I said, I think it's 100% that the Eagles win. I still stand by that. I think that that's a really good defense, an outstanding offense. And with Saquon Barkley and Jalen Hurts, if he's healthy enough, I don't see the Packers. Matter of fact, Love did not look too great, John, in the final game of the season. He had something going on with his elbow. That's never good for a quarterback at all. And they also lost a receiver in Watson. So they're going to be a little bit down maybe, and I think because of that, Philadelphia has the upper hand.
Yeah, the line has spread to at least 4.5 now, Pete. So a field goal was where it started out, and then it just kept going up, and the loss of the receiver, the quarterback looking not so great against a Bears team that actually beat them. Now, they weren't fighting for anything really, Pete. I don't think you want to limp into the playoffs. I'm with you. I think that's exactly what they're doing, limping in.
Yeah, I agree with you. By the way, probably the two most surprising, well, probably the most surprising, the Washington Commanders. I mean, how impressive have they been, John? I mean, Jalen has done an unbelievable job as the quarterback. Jaden Daniels, sorry, I said Jalen. Jaden Daniels, unbelievable season for a rookie. I mean, early in the season, it was absolutely outrageous. It kind of finally started to be a little bit more difficult for him, but nonetheless, what an incredible year he had. That team is well coached. It's been one of these coaches who's been around for quite a while, and he's having some unbelievable success. When you get a quarterback, John, that throws 25 touchdowns and 9 interceptions, but also runs for over 900 yards, I think you found the right guy. And we knew this. You and I talked about him when he transferred to LSU. He was a great player in college, an unbelievable player in college, actually. And then I look over at Baker Mayfield. His best year ever this year with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. That team is scary good, I think. And so that's one of those where I think you got to keep an eye on them. The Buccaneers, with him at quarterback, Johnny, threw 41 touchdowns and 71% completions, Baker Mayfield. I would say that's a pretty damn good year for any quarterback at any time. And Baker Mayfield and that team really look good. So I'm going to throw it in there and say, you know what? I think the home team's going to get it. I think the Bucs win this game.
They're given 3 right now, Pete.
Yep.
Baker with his, because he loves giving that. He inspires that team, much like Josh Allen inspires his team. But Josh does it more with his body, and Baker does it both with his body skill, in other words, as well as he's just a very vocal leader. And I think that team is a very physical team as well, just like Philadelphia. So that matchup potentially down the road, I think that's going to be one that there could be a lot of stretchers on the field if Philly's playing the way that I've seen them play in the past, Pete. They are a physical team, and so is Tampa Bay.
Yep, I totally agree with you. A lot of people are not happy with the coach down in Tampa. I'm totally fine with him. I think Todd Bowles does a great job. They don't have a lot of unbelievable players on that team, and yet here they are in the playoffs, and they play some damn good football. And I'll tell you what, Evans is still one of the best receivers in the entire NFL. I mean, he's just a special guy with his size, his speed, and all of that. How about the Vikings and Rams, John? This one, I think this is damned interesting, and here's why I say that. We all know, and we've all been following around and seeing what's going on with the fires. It's awful. It's unbelievable, really, just to see how incredibly invasive and the speed that's going on with they're talking about 100-mile-an-hour winds, John. I mean, every once in a while they get up to those gusts, but 50, 60, 70-mile-an-hour winds, and sometimes much higher, like I said. I mean, this is an awful situation, and I don't know how they could possibly get it done if they still decide they want to play at SoFi. So it seems to me that the most obvious thing is going to be they go to Arizona. But in any case, the games are going to get played somewhere. Now it's just a matter of where. And my guess would be Arizona. That's what most people have been kicking around, that idea. And does that hurt? You and I talked about this. Does that hurt the home field for the Rams, right? I mean, I think that it probably does a little bit, at least to some degree. But I think the reality is also when you look back at the year and you say, well, who did Minnesota actually lose to? They had a great year. They only had a couple of losses out there. Well, they had 2 losses to the Detroit Lions and 1 to the LA Rams. So if you're wondering where those losses are, it's there. And I'll tell you, John, the Rams are a really good football team, better than people want to give them credit for. And I will tell you this, Matthew Stafford in game 1, and this will be game 2, in game 1, he had 4 touchdowns in that game, John. He threw for almost 300 yards. Stafford, for anybody who thinks he's too old, he's not. He's still great. And when you've got Puka and you've got Kupp, you've got some receivers that really can catch the ball and are very scary, sneaky type receivers that people always underestimate these guys. Even though they've got the names on their jerseys, they still look at them and think, nah, these guys aren't that good. Then they got a great running back in Kieran Williams as well. I mean, that guy in game 1 against the Vikings had nearly 100 yards on 23 carries. So they've got a running back. They've got a really upper-end quarterback. and a couple of unbelievable receivers. I think the Vikings are going to have their hands full.
Yeah, well, the Vikings are getting 3, Pete. That could change, of course, depending on where they relocate the game. And I agree with you. They're going to relocate. It's not going to be played in SoFi. And it's not going to be a slap in the face for LA. They'd love to have it, basically say, hey, we got the fires under control and all that. They do not. And there are a whole bunch of reasons. We don't need to get into that. But I think this is going to be something where the fact that they were able to sit Stafford and Williams and Puka this past week, Pete, and not worry about it while the Vikings had to play their hearts out and couldn't get a 6, couldn't score a touchdown. This is shaping up just like the last time Detroit beat them and they had to go play, the Rams. Now, on the other hand, Pete, if they can't get the right deal done, I'm sure the Vikings would love to host this one. and probably, I bet the Wilfs have already offered it out there to the Rams.
Well, last week they bought $2 million worth of tickets in the Lions Stadium. And let me tell you, as you and I talked about, and I talked to a lot of the people who were out at the game, yes, it was nice that they had the fans right behind the bench and all the rest of that type of stuff. John, let me tell you, when there's 60,000+ people in a stadium and you buy $2 million worth or 2,000 tickets, I'm not really sure that was a dent in the sound. And that volume was high. They turned it up. They were definitely a big part of it in the first half. The second half, when they started to dominate the Vikings, that crowd got even louder, and it made it that much more difficult. So, yeah, very interesting. And I don't know, there's no way in God's green earth they're going to put it over at U.S. Bank. There's just no way.